My brother left me 45 acres of vineyards, 20,000 bottles of wine, and a vintage Mercedes. Just when I thought life had finally given me peace, my estranged daughter suddenly showed up at my door. My brother left me everything: 45 acres of the richest soil in Napa Valley, a cellar holding 20,000 bottles of aging wine, and a vintage Mercedes he swore was his pride and joy. But he also left me a problem I never saw coming. After 10 years of complete silence, my daughter, Lillian, finally came home. But she didn't come home for me. She came for the inheritance. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening from in the comments. The air in the cellar was always cold, thick with the smell of damp stone, oak, and the sweet sleeping promise of fermenting wine. It was my sanctuary, the heart of our family's legacy. My fingers, wrinkled from a lifetime of working the vines, gently wiped a layer of dust from a bottle of our 1998 Cabernet Sauvignon. It was my brother's finest vintage, a wine that held stories in its depths. I was lost in that memory when the heavy oak door at the top of the stone stairs groaned open, cutting through the silence. I looked up, my heart giving a hopeful leap. But the woman standing there wasn't the girl I remembered. It was Lillian, my Lillian, but a stranger all the same. She was about 35 now, sharp and thin in an expensive business suit that seemed to scream of concrete and steel. It was completely out of place here, in the earthy soul of our home. 10 years had passed between us. 10 years of unanswered phone calls, of birthday gifts returned to sender, of a silence that had carved a hole in my heart. She descended the stairs slowly, her heels clicking against the stone with an unnerving confidence. There was no hug, no tears, not even a flicker of warmth in her eyes. Her gaze swept across the racks of wine, the barrels lining the walls, not with nostalgia, but with the cold, calculating look of an investor appraising assets. My hope withered and died in that instant. She stopped a few feet away from me. I could smell her perfume, something sharp and floral that didn't belong in the cellar. She didn't look at the priceless bottle in my hands. She didn't look at me. She looked past me at the fortune resting in the shadows. "I hope Uncle had a peaceful end," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of any real emotion, as if she were reading a line from a corporate memo. "Now," she continued, her eyes finally meeting mine, "we need to talk about getting this place appraised." The words hit me harder than a physical blow. The dust rag slipped from my numb fingers and fell to the floor. My hand, which had been so gently cradling the bottle, froze in place. The shock was immediate, a wave of ice water flooding my chest, and right behind it came a cold, sharp pain. It was the crushing certainty that she hadn't returned because her uncle had died. She hadn't returned because she missed her mother. She hadn't come home at all. She had come to collect. The silence that fell between us then was heavier than any I had ever known, filled with the bitter taste of a homecoming that wasn't one at all. Against my better judgment, a sliver of hope refused to die. Maybe I had misunderstood her in the cellar. Maybe the shock of her uncle's death had made her cold, businesslike. It was a weak, desperate thought, but it was all I had. So, with that foolish ember glowing in my chest, I went upstairs to her old room, intending to air it out, to make it ready, just in case. The door creaked open, revealing a time capsule from a decade ago. Sunlight streamed through the single window, illuminating a galaxy of dust motes dancing in the air. Everything was just as she had left it. A faded poster of some long-forgotten band on the wall, a stack of fashion magazines on her nightstand, a layer of fine dust blanketing it all like a shroud. The room didn't feel like a part of my home anymore. It felt like a museum exhibit dedicated to a girl who had vanished. I opened the window, letting the warm Napa breeze chase away the stale air. I started dusting the dresser, my hand moving in slow, methodical circles. I was on a fool's errand, I knew, but the simple act of cleaning felt like I was doing something, anything to fight the cold dread that had settled in my bones. I told myself that if I could just prepare a space for her, Maybe, just maybe, the daughter I remembered would find her way back to fill it. My cleaning led me to the closet. I opened it, thinking I should make some room for her expensive suit. The smell of cedar and mothballs greeted me. And there, on the top shelf, was a large cardboard box. I remembered it well. It was where I'd stored her old winter clothes. I pulled it down, a small puff of dust exploding into the light. It felt heavier than it should. I set the box on her bed and lifted the lid. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't filled with sweaters and coats. It was full, packed to the brim with a decade of my love, all of it rejected. There was the silk scarf I'd sent for her 26th birthday, still in its crisp department store wrapping, a leather-bound journal for her 30th, its cellophane seal unbroken, a silver locket for the Christmas 5 years ago, its box still tied with the original ribbon. Every single gift I had painstakingly chosen, wrapped, and mailed over 10 years was in this box. Many of them had never even been opened. Piled on top, like tombstones in a graveyard of affection, were the cards. 10 years of them. 10 Christmases. 10 birthdays. My hand trembled as I picked one up. It was from 3 years ago. The front had a painting of our vineyard in the autumn. I opened it. My own handwriting stared back at me, the ink slightly faded. "Dearest Lillian," it read, "we're thinking of you today, just like every day. The Cabernet Franc grapes were perfect this year, and we saved a special bottle for you. We miss you more than words can say, sweetheart. Come home soon. All my love, Mom." She hadn't even bothered to read the words. That was the nail in the coffin. The foolish, hopeful ember in my chest didn't just flicker and die. It was extinguished by a flood of ice-cold reality. This wasn't carelessness. This was a statement. This box was a meticulously kept archive of her indifference. Each sealed package, each unopened card, was a deliberate act of rejection. I gently placed the card back on the pile. I didn't need to see the others. I knew what they would say. With a quiet finality, I put the lid back on the box. The sunlight in the room no longer seemed warm. It just felt harsh, exposing the truth I had tried so hard to avoid. The hope I'd carried upstairs was gone, replaced by a sorrow so heavy and so real it felt like I could hold it in my hands. The daughter I was hoping to find wasn't lost somewhere, waiting to be rediscovered. She had never existed at all. Closing the lid on that box of unopened gifts didn't just close a chapter. It threw me back to the day the story fell apart. The memory, sharp and unwelcome, ambushed me. It was 10 years ago, on a sweltering August afternoon when the air was so thick you could drink it, and the drone of the cicadas was a constant high-pitched scream. We were in the backyard, under the shade of the old grape arbor. The vines were heavy with fruit, the tight clusters of Zinfandel grapes glowing like jewels in the dappled sunlight. I was trimming a few stray leaves, enjoying the familiar earthy scent of the vineyard. Lillian, then 25, was pacing back and forth on the flagstone patio. Even then, she looked like she was just visiting. She wore a stylish sundress and sandals that were completely impractical for life on a vineyard, looking like a page torn from a fashion magazine. She had been home from the city for a week, and a storm had been brewing the entire time. I could feel it in her restless energy, in the way she constantly checked her phone, her face tight with anxiety. Finally, the storm broke. "I need you to do something for me," she said, stopping her pacing. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were hard. "Anything, sweetheart." "You know that," I said, setting my shears down. "I need you to sell the 10 acres at the north end of the property." The cicadas seemed to buzz louder. I must have misheard her. "Sell it? Lillian, that's our oldest block of Cabernet Franc. Your grandfather planted those vines with his own 2 hands. "I don't care who planted them," she snapped, the casual pretense gone. "It's just land, and I need the money. I'm in some trouble." My stomach tightened. "What kind of trouble?" She waved a dismissive hand. "It's nothing. I just made some bad investments, a little bit of debt." But I knew my daughter. I'd seen the frantic, desperate look in her eyes before. This wasn't about a bad investment. Lillian, is this about gambling again? Her face hardened. It doesn't matter what it's about. What matters is that you can fix it. People are selling parcels like that for millions. It's a gold mine, and you're just sitting on it. This land isn't a gold mine, Lillian. It's our life. It's our legacy. It's not a piggy bank for you to break open whenever you're in a jam. That's when she exploded. Her face, so beautiful, twisted into an ugly mask of fury. "You owe me this!" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the hot, still air. "I didn't ask to be born into this boring farm life. My friends are backpacking through Europe, and I'm stuck here smelling manure." The cruelty of her words stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't just the demand for money that hurt. It was the venom, the sheer contempt she had for the life my husband and I had worked so hard to give her, the life her grandparents had bled for. The manure she smelled was the scent of our dedication, the smell of the soil that had paid for her clothes, her car, her expensive city apartment. "This boring farm life is your heritage," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's a prison," she spat back, "and I'm done with it." She didn't wait for a response. She just turned, her impractical sandals slapping against the stone, and walked away. She went into the house, packed a bag, and was gone within the hour. I just stood there under the arbor, the sun beating down on my head, the buzz of the cicadas filling the sudden, deafening silence. The pain was immense, a physical ache in my chest. It wasn't the pain of a daughter leaving home. It was the pain of realizing that the selfish, ungrateful stranger who had just walked away had been living under my roof all along. I just hadn't been willing to see her. The days following Lillian's return were a quiet, agonizing Cold War. She stayed in her old room, which I'd foolishly cleaned for her, but she was barely in it. She treated our home like a hotel, coming and going at odd hours, her phone perpetually pressed to her ear as she spoke in low, urgent tones. We moved around each other like ghosts, the air thick with unspoken words. The pain of her rejection had begun to harden into a cold, watchful resolve. I knew she was up to something. I just didn't know what. The answer came, as it often did, from the vineyard itself. The morning mist was still clinging to the valleys when I went out for my dawn walk, a ritual as old as my time on this land. The air was cool and clean, smelling of damp earth and new leaves. In the distance, I saw the stooped, familiar figure of Mr. Alvarez, our vineyard manager, already at work. He'd been with our family since before I was born, and his hands knew the story of every vine on this property. He was as much a part of this place as the soil itself. As I got closer, he straightened up, wiping his brow with the back of a weathered hand. His face, a roadmap of wrinkles carved by the California sun, was troubled. "Good morning, Mrs. Reed," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Good morning, Manuel. You're out here before the sun is." "The old vines need the most care," he replied, his eyes not quite meeting mine. He gestured with his pruning shears toward the far eastern slope. "Saw something unusual this morning, down by the old service road." I followed his gaze. "What was it?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Your daughter's car, the shiny black one. It was parked there, tucked away behind the eucalyptus trees." A knot of ice formed in my stomach. "Was she alone?" "No, ma'am," he said, finally looking at me. His dark eyes were filled with a quiet loyalty that made my own eyes sting. "She was with a man, a city man, fancy suit, shiny shoes. He was holding one of those tablet computers, pointing at the hills, talking loud." "What was he saying?" I asked, though I already knew. I could feel the answer in my bones. He was talking about development potential, about a luxury resort with a panoramic view. He said our Cabernet Franc block had the best vantage point in the whole valley. Mr. Alvarez spat on the ground, a rare show of disgust. He talked about our vines like they were weeds that needed clearing. The picture was sickeningly clear. Lillian wasn't just planning to sell the land, she was already showing it to sharks, carving up her heritage before it was even hers to sell. She was walking on her grandfather's legacy with a man who saw it only as a construction site. Mr. Alvarez must have seen the despair on my face. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Mrs. Reed," he said, his gaze steady and strong. "The roots of this vineyard run deep. They are old and they are strong. They have survived drought and fire and blight. Don't you let anyone convince you to pull them up for a handful of quick money. It's never worth it." His words were a lifeline. In that moment, I knew I wasn't fighting this battle alone. He was with me. The land was with me. A silent pact was formed between us, an understanding that passed without another word. My sorrow was still there, a heavy weight in my chest, but now it was mixed with something else, the iron-hard resolve of a fight that had just begun. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening from in the comments. We held a small reception at the house after my brother's funeral. It wasn't a party, just a quiet gathering for close friends and neighbors to share a memory and a plate of food. The house was filled with the low murmur of sympathetic voices and the scent of coffee and casserole dishes brought by kind-hearted people from town. It was all a blur of handshakes, sad smiles, and whispered condolences. Through it all, Lillian was a vision of perfect, respectable grief. She stood by the fireplace, dressed in a simple, elegant black dress, accepting hugs from people she hadn't seen in a decade. She dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue, her expression a carefully crafted mask of sorrow. She played the part of the devoted, heartbroken niece so flawlessly that for a fleeting, foolish moment, I wondered if I had misjudged her. She spoke about her beloved uncle, sharing a manufactured memory here and there, her voice soft and tinged with just the right amount of sadness. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. I retreated to the kitchen, needing a moment away from the suffocating sympathy. My own grief was a raw, gaping wound, and watching Lillian parade her false sorrow around was like having salt poured into it. I leaned against the counter, my hands gripping the cool granite, and took a deep breath. From my vantage point, I could see the living room through the doorway. That's when I saw it. Lillian, thinking she was unobserved, deftly extracted herself from a conversation with one of our oldest neighbors. With a final, sorrowful nod, she slipped away from the crowd and moved down the short hallway toward the back porch, her phone already in her hand. Her movements were quick and furtive, a stark contrast to the slow, grieving posture she had maintained all afternoon. A cold spike of suspicion shot through me. I moved silently to the kitchen window, which gave me a clear view of the porch. She was huddled in the corner, her back to the house, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. The mask was off. The grief was gone. In its place was a sharp, predatory excitement. "No, it's going even better than we planned," she murmured into the phone. A small, triumphant smile played on her lips. "They're all buying it, hook, line, and sinker. The grieving niece has returned to the fold." She let out a soft, breathy laugh that made my blood run cold. "Yeah, the old lady is a sentimental wreck, but the property is incredible. Absolutely prime. We just need to be patient, let the dust settle. She won't know what hit her." I stood frozen, the coffee pot I was about to refill growing heavy in my hand. Every word was a shard of ice piercing my heart. The old lady. She wasn't her mother anymore. She was an obstacle, a sentimental wreck to be managed and overcome. The property wasn't our home, our legacy. It was a target, a prize to be won. The quiet murmur from the living room, the sounds of genuine mourning and respect for my brother, faded into a dull roar in my ears. All I could hear was my daughter's chilling whisper and that soft, ugly laugh. The pain of my brother's death was still there, a deep, throbbing ache. But in that moment, something new was forged within it. The sorrow didn't vanish. But it crystallized. It hardened into a cold, clear, and unshakable resolve. The grief turned to contempt, the hurt to a righteous fury. I placed the coffee pot back on the counter with a quiet, deliberate click. The battle lines had been drawn. I was no longer just a grieving mother hoping for her daughter's return. I was the guardian of a legacy, and I would protect it from the enemy within my own walls. The war had begun. A week after the funeral, I found myself sitting in the worn leather chair opposite Mr. Abernathy's desk. His law office hadn't changed in 40 years. It was a small, cramped space downtown, smelling of old paper, leather-bound books, and the weak coffee he always had brewing on a hot plate in the corner. Stacks of files and legal texts teetered on every available surface, forming dusty skyscrapers that threatened to collapse with the slightest nudge. Mr. Abernathy had been our family's lawyer forever. He'd drafted my parents' wills and had been a close friend to my brother, Richard. He adjusted his spectacles, his kind, wrinkled face looking grave. "Evelyn, I've been over Richard's will a dozen times," he began, his voice a dry rustle like turning pages. "And to be frank, it's peculiar." I stiffened. "Peculiar? How? I thought it was straightforward. He left everything to me." "On the surface, yes," he agreed, tapping a thick, bound document on his desk. "The vineyard, the house, the cellar, the investments, it all passes directly to you. That part is ironclad." He paused, leaning forward. "The peculiarity lies in what it doesn't say. For a man as meticulous as your brother, there are some glaring omissions, some invitations for trouble." A cold unease crept up my spine. "What do you mean, invitations?" "Well, for instance," he said, flipping a page, "there's no specific clause preventing a challenge to your stewardship. There's no language about what happens if your ability to manage the estate is called into question. He left the door wide open for someone to argue that you, for whatever reason, are not fit to run the business." He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "It's almost as if he wanted to make it easy for someone to contest your control." My mind immediately flew to Lillian, to her cold appraisal of the cellar, her whispered phone call on the porch. This wasn't a random legal oversight. This was a targeted vulnerability. "And there's more," Mr. Abernathy continued, oblivious to the storm gathering in my mind. "The language around the distribution of assets upon your death is also unusually vague. It creates a legal gray area. A clever lawyer could drive a truck through these loopholes." I felt a dizzying sense of confusion. My brother Richard had been the most careful, detail-oriented man I had ever known. He planned his vine grafting schedules 5 years in advance. He would never draft a legal document this sloppy. It was completely out of character. It was impossible. Unless it wasn't a mistake. "Why would he do that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why would he make his own will so weak?" Mr. Abernathy leaned back in his creaking chair, steepling his fingers. He looked at me, his eyes full of a sad, knowing wisdom. "Evelyn, your brother loved you very much. He was also one of the shrewdest men I've ever met. He knew people. He saw things." He took a deep breath. "I can't say for sure, but this document, it doesn't feel like a shield. It feels like a net. It reads like an open invitation, specifically designed to attract a very greedy fish." The air in the stuffy office suddenly felt electric. My confusion began to melt away, replaced by a startling, thrilling curiosity. This wasn't an act of carelessness. This was a strategy. My brother, even from the grave, was playing a game of chess, and he had just shown me the board. I wasn't just a grieving sister inheriting a property. I was a player in a plan he had set in motion long ago, a plan to catch a fish, and I had a sinking, certain feeling I knew exactly who that fish was. Mr. Abernathy's words, "an invitation for a very greedy fish," echoed in my head all the way home. The phrase snagged on a memory, something my brother Richard had said to me a few years back. We'd been standing in the old garage, and he was polishing the chrome on his vintage Mercedes, a beautiful 1968 convertible he'd spent a decade restoring. He'd patted the fender and said with a wink, "Evelyn, if you ever find yourself in a real pickle, a real jam you can't get out of, the answer's right here, in my pride and joy." I'd laughed it off as one of his eccentric jokes. It wasn't a joke anymore. My heart pounding with a strange mix of dread and hope, I walked out to the garage. The air inside was still and thick with the smell of old gasoline, sawdust, and time. And there it was, in the center of the space, a large, still form under a heavy canvas tarp. It looked like a sleeping giant. With trembling hands, I grabbed a corner of the tarp and pulled. The heavy fabric slid off, revealing the deep midnight blue paint and gleaming chrome of the Mercedes. It was immaculate, not a speck of dust on its perfect finish. Richard had loved this car. I opened the driver's side door and slid into the cool leather seat. The smell was of old leather and his faint, familiar scent of pipe tobacco. I ran my hands over the dashboard, the steering wheel, looking for anything out of place. Nothing. I checked the glove compartment. Only old registration papers and a tire gauge. I was about to give up, feeling foolish, when I remembered how he was always tinkering in the trunk. I got out and opened it. At first glance, it was empty, just the clean carpeted floor. But Richard had been a master craftsman. I ran my hands along the edges of the carpet, pressing down. Near the back, behind the wheel well, my fingers found it. A slight give, a section of the floor that wasn't quite solid. I pulled at the corner of the carpet, and it lifted away, revealing a small, flush-mounted metal panel with a tiny keyhole. Taped neatly next to it was a small silver key. My breath hitched. This was it. I unlocked the panel and lifted it up. Nestled inside a custom-fitted compartment was a heavy steel document box. I carried it into the house and set it on the kitchen table, the metal cold against the warm wood. I didn't need a key for this one. The latch was unlocked. I lifted the lid. Inside, there were two things. The first was a professionally bound document with a blue ribbon and a notary seal. The title on the front read, "Addendum to the Last Will and Testament of Richard A. Reed." Beneath it was a thick, sealed envelope, and on the front, in my brother's strong, familiar handwriting, were two words, "For Evelyn." My hands shook as I tore it open. It was a letter, several pages long. "My dearest sister," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the fish has taken the bait. I am so sorry to have left you with this fight, but I saw no other way. I saw the greed in Lillian's eyes years ago, the same way I see blight on a vine before it spreads. She doesn't love the land, Evelyn. She loves what it's worth. The official will our lawyer has is a trap. I made it weak on purpose, full of holes I knew her ambition couldn't resist. It was the bait. This addendum, the one in your hands now, is your shield. It is my true and final word. Let her make her move. Let her show her true colors. Let her expose the rot in her own heart. And only when she has proven, beyond any doubt, that she is unworthy of this legacy, do you show her this. It is the ace up your sleeve." Tears streamed down my face, blurring the words. I read on, my heart aching with a mix of profound sorrow and overwhelming gratitude. He had seen it all. He had known. Underneath the letter were more documents, photocopies of credit card statements showing massive cash withdrawals at casinos in Vegas, letters from debt collectors, printouts of emails between Lillian and a developer discussing the sale of a Napa property. He had been gathering evidence, protecting me, protecting our home, even as he was dying. I collapsed into my chair, the letter clutched to my chest, and I wept. I wept for the loss of my brilliant, loving brother. I wept for the daughter I had truly and finally lost. But through the tears, a new feeling rose up, fierce and strong. It was relief. I wasn't alone in this fight. I had never been alone. Richard was right here with me, his wisdom a weapon in my hand, his love a shield around my heart. The game was on. Clutching my brother's letter and the secret will felt like holding a lit stick of dynamite. I knew it was only a matter of time before Lillian made her move, and the waiting was a quiet, nerve-shredding torture. I spent my days going through the motions, tending to the vines and managing the books. But my nights were sleepless. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house groan and settle, my ears straining for any sound out of the ordinary. One night, a few weeks after my visit to the lawyer, I was jolted awake by a faint, metallic clang from outside. It was a sound that didn't belong to the night's usual symphony of crickets and rustling leaves. I sat up in bed, my heart instantly hammering against my ribs. It was nearly 2 in the morning. I slipped out of bed and went to the window that overlooked the northern slope of the vineyard, the location of our oldest, most precious, and most temperamental block of Cabernet Franc vines. The moon was a thin sliver, casting long, eerie shadows across the rows of grapes. At first, I saw nothing. Then, a flicker of movement. A dark figure, dressed head to toe in black, was moving stealthily away from the main path, heading toward the small pump house that controlled the irrigation for that entire section. Even in the poor light, I knew. It was Lillian. I watched, frozen, as she reached the pump house. She fumbled with something near the main manifold, a complex network of pipes and pressure valves that fed water to the vines. I couldn't see exactly what she was doing, but her movements were furtive and deliberate. Then I heard another sound, a sharp, wrenching crack, followed by a low hiss that grew into the distinct sound of water spraying uncontrollably where it shouldn't be. My first instinct was to run out there, to scream at her, to stop her. But Richard's words echoed in my mind. Let her show her true colors. Let her expose the rot in her own heart. I stayed put, my knuckles white as I gripped the windowsill, forcing myself to be a silent witness. After a moment, she stepped back. She scanned the area, then bent down and picked up a heavy-looking rock from the edge of the service path. She walked back to the manifold and, with a grunt of effort, slammed it against the valve she had just broken. Then she dropped the rock nearby, as if it had simply fallen and caused the damage. She had created an accident, a plausible, unfortunate, and utterly devastating accident. She looked at her handiwork for a second longer, then turned and melted back into the shadows, heading for the house. I didn't move from the window for a long time. The sound of the leaking water was a steady, sickening pulse in the quiet of the night. The crickets chirped on, oblivious. I felt a coldness spread through me that had nothing to do with the late-night air. This was a new level of betrayal. This wasn't just about money or legal maneuvering anymore. This was a physical assault on the vineyard itself. She was trying to kill the vines. She was willing to poison the roots of her own heritage, to destroy the very thing she so desperately wanted to possess, all to create a financial crisis that would force my hand. The last shred of hope I might have held for her, the last microscopic ember of a mother's love, was finally and completely extinguished. She wasn't just greedy. She wasn't just selfish. She was a saboteur. She was cruel. And she had just handed me all the proof I would ever need. The morning after Lillian's sabotage was deceptively beautiful. I sat on the front porch swing, a cup of coffee warming my hands, and watched the sun burn the last of the mist off the vines. Mr. Alvarez and his crew had already been out to the pump house. I told them I'd heard the leak in the night, and he'd quietly fixed the accident, shaking his head at the strange misfortune of a rock falling in just the right, or wrong, place. He knew, and I knew he knew, but we said nothing. Lillian was still asleep, blissfully unaware that her little scheme had failed. I was playing the long game now, just as Richard had intended. The peace of the morning was shattered by the crunch of tires on our gravel driveway. It wasn't Mr. Alvarez's familiar pickup truck. This was a beat-up sedan, a bland beige color that sputtered to a stop in front of the house. A man in a wrinkled, ill-fitting suit got out, holding a thick manila envelope. He looked nervous, out of place, and my entire body went on high alert. He walked up the steps to the porch. "Evelyn Reed?" he asked, avoiding my eyes. "I am," I said, my voice steady. "This is for you," he mumbled, thrusting the envelope at me. "You've been served." He turned on his heel before I could say a word, practically jogging back to his car and speeding away as if the hounds of hell were after him. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. It was heavy, official. My name and address were typed on a crisp white label. With a deep, steadying breath, I sat back down on the swing and tore it open. The documents inside were dense with the cold, impenetrable language of the law. But I didn't need a dictionary to understand the words that leaped off the page. Petition to the Superior Court of California in the matter of the Reed family estate. The plaintiff, Lillian Daughtry. The defendant, Evelyn Reed. My hands began to shake as I read the allegations. Lillian, my own daughter, was formally suing me. The petition argued that due to my advanced age and recent bereavement, I was suffering from diminished cognitive capacity. It claimed I was no longer capable of making sound financial decisions and was therefore unfit to manage the estate. It was a formal request to the court to appoint an independent conservator whose sole purpose would be to oversee the immediate appraisal and liquidation of all assets. Liquidation. The word was a punch to the gut. She didn't want to run the vineyard. She wanted to burn it to the ground and pocket the insurance money. She wanted to erase it, to turn our family's soul into cash. But the final, deepest cut came on the last page. It was an excerpt from Lillian's sworn declaration, a personal statement to the court. My eyes scanned the lines, and then they locked on a single sentence. "This estate represents a significant opportunity for modern development," she had written. "It's time for the new generation to take over. My mother's time is over." My mother's time is over. The coffee cup slipped from my numb fingers and shattered on the wooden porch, the dark liquid splashing like blood. The beautiful morning, the singing birds, the warm sun, it all vanished. My universe narrowed to the hateful words on that page. This wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a public execution. She was declaring to the entire world that I was old, incompetent, and finished, an obstacle to be removed. The profound, aching sadness I had carried for weeks was instantly burned away by a white-hot flash of rage. It was a clean, righteous anger that solidified my spine to steel. I slowly crumpled the papers in my fist, the sharp edges digging into my palm. The pain felt good. It was real. Lillian had declared war, not in the shadows with a rock and a broken pipe, but in the open, with my name and my dignity on the line. Fine. If she wanted a fight, she was about to get the fight of her life. The mandatory mediation session was held in a conference room that felt like the inside of a refrigerator. It was a soulless, beige box with fluorescent lights that hummed and flickered, making everyone look tired and pale. The air was stale and thick with tension. On one side of the polished mahogany table sat Lillian and her lawyer, a slick, overconfident man with too much gel in his hair who looked like a shark in a $1,000 suit. On our side, there was just me and Mr. Abernathy, his ancient, overflowing briefcase resting on the floor beside him like a loyal old dog. Lillian was the picture of concerned professionalism. She spoke in a calm, measured tone, her lawyer nodding along, about her vision for the estate. She used a lot of corporate buzzwords like synergy, optimization, and leveraging assets. She painted a heartbreaking picture of a daughter forced to step in to save her family's legacy from her own mother's well-meaning but outdated sentimentality. "I love my mother," she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity as she looked at the mediator. "But sentiment doesn't pay the bills. This isn't just a farm. It's a multi-million-dollar business, and it needs to be run like one. I have a plan to modernize, to bring the Reed name into the 21st century." Her lawyer took over, his voice smooth as oil. "Miss Daughtry simply wants to unlock the property's true potential. Her only goal is to secure the financial future of this family for generations to come. My client is a visionary. Mrs. Reed, with all due respect, is a traditionalist living in the past. I sat in silence, my hands folded calmly on the table. I let them build their entire fantasy, brick by gilded brick. I let them paint me as a doddering old fool and Lillian as the savvy, reluctant hero. When they were finally finished, the mediator turned to us. "Mr. Abernathy?" Mr. Abernathy didn't stand. He didn't raise his voice. He simply opened his old briefcase and took out a thin folder. "That's a very compelling story," he said, his voice dry as dust. "But we feel the facts might tell a slightly different one." He slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a credit card statement. "This is from last March," he said calmly. "It shows cash withdrawals totaling $50,000 at the Bellagio Casino in Las Vegas." Lillian's lawyer started to object, but Mr. Abernathy placed another statement on top of the first. "And this is from May, $65,000 at Caesar's Palace." He continued, placing one statement after another on the table, creating a neat, damning pile. "And June and August, a clear pattern of bad investments, I believe you called them, Ms. Daughtry?" Lillian's face had gone from confident to chalk white. The color drained from her cheeks as if a plug had been pulled. "Of course," Mr. Abernathy continued, his voice still maddeningly calm. "That might explain these." He took out a second, thicker stack of papers and dropped them on the table with a soft thud. "Letters from collection agencies. It seems your vision for the future involves paying off a rather significant past." Lillian was speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. Her lawyer was shuffling papers, his slick composure completely gone. "But this," Mr. Abernathy said, "is my personal favorite." He produced one final document, a printout of an email chain. "This is an email from you, Miss Daughtry, to a Mr. Henderson at Sterling Development Group. It's dated the day after your uncle's funeral." He leaned forward slightly. "In it, you refer to your mother as the old lady and describe the vineyard as prime for a luxury resort. You seem quite eager to liquidate the asset, as you put it." He pushed the email across the table. The game was over. The carefully constructed narrative of the concerned daughter, the visionary businesswoman, lay in ruins. All that was left was the ugly truth. A greedy, desperate gambler caught red-handed in her own lies. Lillian stared at the evidence, her face a mask of pure, humiliated fury. She had been so sure of her victory, so confident in my weakness, that she never imagined I had been holding all the cards the entire time. The air in the conference room had curdled. The revelations of Lillian's debts and secret dealings hung in the stale air, a toxic cloud of shame and fury. But if I thought she would back down, I was wrong. Humiliation had only hardened her resolve, twisting her features into a tight mask of defiance. She was a cornered animal, and that made her even more dangerous. Her lawyer, having recovered some of his composure, went on the offensive. He pushed the pile of incriminating evidence to the side of the table as if it were trash. "This is a pathetic and desperate smear campaign," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "My client's personal financial history is entirely irrelevant to the matter at hand. This isn't a trial of her character. It's a question of this estate's future. The fact remains that Mrs. Reed is an elderly woman, clearly overwhelmed, who is lashing out with these distractions to hide her own inability to manage a modern business." He leaned forward, his eyes locking on the mediator. "Her past actions do not, in any way, diminish Ms. Daughtry's legal rights as the primary heir apparent." He sat back, a smug look on his face. He thought he had found a foothold, a legal high ground from which to continue the attack. He thought it was still a fight about my competence versus her ambition. He was wrong. I gave Mr. Abernathy a slow, deliberate nod. This was the moment. This was the ace up our sleeve, Mr. Abernathy let the lawyer's words hang in the air for a long, heavy moment before he spoke. "You're right," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight that made everyone at the table lean in. "Her past actions are ultimately irrelevant." He reached down into his ancient briefcase one last time. "Because we have one final document." He brought out the addendum, the document from the Mercedes, bound in its official blue ribbon. He didn't slide it across the table. He placed it in the center with the quiet reverence of a priest placing a holy text on an altar. The room fell completely silent. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to stop humming. "This," Mr. Abernathy announced to the room, "is a legally notarized addendum to the last will and testament of Richard A. Reed, discovered after the initial filing. It contains only one clause." He carefully untied the ribbon, opened the document to the single, typed page, and cleared his throat. He began to read, his voice clear and steady, each word a hammer blow falling on the anvil of the silent room. "In the event that my niece, Lillian Daughtry, initiates or participates in any legal action whatsoever which seeks to contest, challenge, or remove the designated executor, Evelyn Reed, from her position of authority over this estate, all rights of inheritance bestowed upon the aforementioned Lillian Daughtry within this will, and any previous versions thereof, shall be rendered immediately and irrevocably null and void." He paused, letting the first part sink in before delivering the final, fatal line. "She will be, for all legal and financial purposes, completely and totally disinherited." A silence so profound, so absolute, descended upon the room that I could hear the blood pounding in my own ears. Lillian's lawyer stared at the document, his mouth slightly agape, his slick confidence shattered into a million pieces. But I was watching Lillian. Her face was a canvas of collapsing emotions. The defiant fury drained away, replaced by a wave of confusion, then dawning horror, and finally, a vast, empty landscape of disbelief. She stared at the paper on the table, as if it were written in a language she couldn't comprehend. Her own signature was on the lawsuit that had triggered this very clause. Her own greed had sprung the trap. Her own hand had just signed away her entire future. It was a perfect, self-inflicted knockout. The fight was over. There was no dramatic exit, no final, tearful confrontation. After the bombshell of the addendum, the fight simply evaporated. Lillian and her lawyer packed up their briefcases in a stunned, humiliated silence and left. I haven't seen or heard from her since. I don't know where she went. And for the first time in a long time, I find that I don't care. That evening, I sat on the old wooden swing on the front porch, the same one my father had built decades ago. The sun was setting over the western hills, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of orange, purple, and gold. The light washed over the endless rows of vines, making the leaves glow. A gentle breeze rustled through the vineyard, carrying the rich, loamy scent of the earth. It was the smell of my entire life. I didn't feel the triumphant joy of a victor. There was no elation, no desire to celebrate. The anger that had sustained me through the fight had burned itself out, leaving behind a vast, quiet emptiness. In its place was a profound sense of peace, but it was a peace tinged with a deep, unshakable sorrow. I had won the war, saved the land, honored my brother's final wish, but I had lost my daughter. The finality of it settled into my bones, a heavy but necessary truth. The Lillian I had loved, the little girl who chased butterflies between these very vines, was a ghost, a memory. The woman who had taken her place was a stranger I no longer had to fight. The screen door creaked open behind me, and Mr. Alvarez stepped out onto the porch. He moved with his usual quiet grace, his old work boots making almost no sound on the wooden planks. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He simply came and stood beside the swing, his gaze also fixed on the magnificent sunset. We stood there together in a comfortable, shared silence. two old guardians watching over our kingdom. After a few moments, he placed a single, long-stemmed glass on the small table beside me. It was filled with a wine so dark red it was almost black. I knew what it was without asking. The 1998 Cabernet Sauvignon, my brother's finest vintage, the bottle I had been holding the day Lillian returned. I picked up the glass. The crystal was cool against my skin. I looked at the wine, at the deep, rich color that held the sunlight and the soil, the rain and the struggle, the love and the legacy of generations. This was what we had been fighting for. Not the money, not the property, but the soul of this place, captured in a glass. I raised it, not to my lips, but out toward the horizon, a silent toast to the setting sun. A thank you to the brother who had trusted me, a promise to the land that I would always be its keeper. I had lost a daughter, yes, but in doing so, I had saved everything else. And in the quiet peace of that evening, with the taste of freedom on the air, I knew it was a price I had been willing to pay. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment 1 below. If not, feel free to comment 0 so we know and can improve future videos. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.